nerds. This is Nerdy by Nature. Glad to be back. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler, aka Agent Smith.
And I'm Charlie, aka Captain Rogers.
And as we mentioned in our previous episode where we reviewed The Shining and Dr. Sleep, in this episode we're going to be reviewing the graphic novel God Country, done by Donnie Cates and Jeff Shaw. And it's just a one-off, by itself storyline that takes place in West Texas. It's essentially desert western meets intergalactic god storyline. So there's a whole lot, very busy book that packs a big punch, and it's one that we personally both really enjoy. It's very heartfelt, and it just has a great overall message. And it's really, it's kind of weird because it's a feel-good book, but it also has its sad moments and real moments and raw moments.
Definitely.
As well. And so with that, Cap, we're going to go ahead and dive right into this graphic novel. And I should go ahead and say, spoiler alert, we are going to give a full recap of God Country. So if you haven't read this particular graphic novel, we recommend that you go ahead and listen to any of our other episodes. Of course, you can feel free to get ready and have a Star Wars binger like we probably will for Rise of Skywalker right around the corner.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty excited about that. But nevertheless, we'll stay on topic here and get right into God Country, which opens in the desert with some narration, and we find out that the setting for our story is going to be in West Texas. And so we're introduced to the Quinlan family, and we meet the eldest member, the main character of this graphic novel, Emmett Quinlan. And so we learn a little bit about their family dynamic, and it's one that you can tell right away is
tragic.
A little tragic, and the reason being is because our main character Emmett is suffering from Alzheimer's.
Right.
And it's not something that I personally have experienced, but from what I understand, from what I've always heard and read about it, it's difficult to deal with. It's something that no one is ever quite prepared for. It's, in most cases, a worst case scenario. Right. And so I feel like this particular graphic novel, without trying to sound too over the top, it really does a great job of showing the realism of what this disease can do to a family dynamic and how they try to handle it and interact with it.
Yeah, and I've always heard of this disease being, basically people call it the long goodbye, just because, you start to forget things, and many times they forget their families, and it's rough on everybody involved. It's just the worst reality you could think of, in my opinion. But aside from Emmett, we've got Emmett's son, Roy, who lives with him, as well as Roy's wife, Janie, and their daughter, Dina. And from the get-go, it appears that Roy and his family have moved in to help take care of Emmett because of everything that's going on and the fact that he is forgetting pretty much everything.
And everybody.
I mean, he even forgets them and freaks out and, says, "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" And, I mean, it's just very sad, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, the panels are not... If you're looking for a cheery graphic novel,
right,
this isn't exactly it. I know I said it was feel-good earlier, and it is. There are certain moments that are definitely feel-good, but it doesn't start in the cheeriest of places, so you have to swallow some tough pills before you get to the fantasy thrill ride that is the rest of God Country.
Right.
And of course, the sheriff comes out to the property with Roy and explains, we found him out on the highway, had to get him, really had to fight tooth and nail, quite literally. I believe he breaks one of their jaws just to get him back to the farmhouse there. Right. So you can tell right away that this is kind of a brutish old man that is quite upset, and understandably so, because he can't remember, in some cases, who he is, where he is, or what he's doing.
Right, and the common theme is, he's always asking where his wife is and yelling her name, which in the story, his wife has passed away, and her name being Elizabeth, you hear a lot about her. And it's just, you just keep reiterating the fact that it's a very sad and tragic story to begin with. And it even reflects it in the art of the book. I mean, the first few pages are just very dark and grimy, and I mean, it just kind of gives you the impression of the world that they live in being so upsetting,
Right, it's raining. To play off of that, it's raining in a couple of the opening panels as well, and it's that old adage of, when it rains, it pours.
Right, and like we've talked about before the podcast, that I didn't really care for the art at first, but now that I think about it and the more I look at it, I think that was intentional, just because it is so tragic, and the way the art looks, it's not a world that you would want to live in.
No, it's not a world that anybody would want to be a part of, and it's kind of scary in certain panels as well, because at one point he's coming down the stairway there and repeatedly is saying, do you hear me? Get out of my house, I'll kill you. And you've got his granddaughter there at the foot of the stairway just looking up, and of course, obviously no child should hear language like that in that situation. So it's one where they're all just trying to do what's best for him, do what's best for their daughter, his granddaughter, and they're really at their wits' end, at the end of their ropes in multiple situations where the mom and daughter combo are on the verge of trying to leave and get away from it.
Right.
Of course, Roy, being the son, is like, hey, look, I know he shouldn't have said that, and I know this has been hard, but he's my dad, he needs me, and in turn I need you. And so you start to see very quickly that the whole support system, for even the house itself, let's be honest, it's been there for a long time, is quite literally falling apart from every angle.
Right, and the sheriff, I will say, was a very compassionate character. And, he talks to Roy and he tells him things aren't getting better and we need to do something to fix this. And, just the way he talks to Roy and everything, you can tell that he cares and he doesn't want to do anything to upset this family, but at the same time he has to keep the town safe, and it's becoming less and less safe because of how aggressive Emmett is, just from not knowing anyone and not being able to find anything that is recognizable to him.
And of course we had mentioned earlier that it was raining in a few of those panels, and so that just intensifies as we go along in the panels themselves. And so we learn that later that night there winds up being this storm that is brewing, and it's a little bit more than just a storm. Winds up being a tornado, which is, so things have gone from bad to worse.
And the storm, even as sad as it is, the storm even takes out their house, and it's a home that's been in their family for a long time, it seems. And so not only is he losing his father, but he's losing, his whole world. He's losing his childhood home and everything. It's just, I can't stress enough how upsetting the first part of the book is. But it does get
right off
much
the bat,
better.
Yeah, it's just, it really kind of puts you back in your seat unless of course you're sitting down while you're reading it. You're already in your seat, but regardless, it's one that definitely takes a toll on you right out of the gate of, oh wow, okay, this is heavy. It gets heavy early.
Absolutely.
But then does lighten up a little bit in the middle and gets heavier again towards the end. So of course, post-storm, they're looking at all the damage and just trying to see whether or not Emmett is still even alive, because it was more or less almost a direct hit, like you said, on the farmhouse there.
Right.
And then we start to see, towards the end of the first couple pages, the more fantastical side of God Country really start to develop, because we get introduced to this shadowy figure / demon. And so it's like, okay, well, this can't possibly get any worse, could it?
Right. Yeah, and the storm and tornado seems to be much more than just a storm.
Right, and we see, of course, I mentioned earlier that the wife and daughter, they're at their wits' end, and she's threatening to take her away or separate her from the situation, and to an extent she does, gets in the pickup truck and speeds off in a fit of anger, of course, understandably so, all while this storm, air quotes, is brewing.
Right.
And then, of course, from there, we see her recognize, oh, this storm is heavier than I thought. It's turned out to be a full-blown tornado. It's headed right for, what seems to be heading right for the Quinlan farmhouse. And so she pulls a Yui, goes back, and tries to rush to, I would imagine probably try to save both Emmett and Roy, or at least to an extent Roy.
Right.
And we find out that it's a little bit too late. She gets there after the rubble. We, of course, see, as you had mentioned earlier, the farmhouse being completely destroyed by this tornado. And, of course, Roy believes that also Emmett fell prey to the tornado as well.
Right.
And that he's lost his father. So, again, it starts in a really heavy place.
Definitely.
For sure. And then going back to the shadowy demon figure that is approaching the child, and it's like, oh boy, what's going to happen here? From panel to panel, it just keeps getting closer and closer, gets tense. But then the very next panel following that, down comes the thunder. And that's where Emmett has this newfound sword. It's noticeably massive.
Mm-hmm.
Just a mythical weapon, what you would fully expect a mythical sword of this proportion to look like.
Oh, yeah.
We find out in this particular graphic novel it's 12 feet in length, so that's pretty significant.
Right.
Just to put that into perspective, I think most average homes, it's like from floor to ceiling is 12 feet, so,
Right.
sword would fill up the living room.
Which is kind of funny because in a lot of anime and mangas, they generally, if it's, a character with a sword or weapon, they're always disproportionately large to the character.
Seems to be double the size of the character.
And so I don't know that really has anything to do or if the two correlate, but it's interesting to me that it's always depicted that way, mostly in anime and mangas. And then you see in this story, it's very much similar to that type of thing.
Certainly so. And so, of course, with this newfound sword, Emmett is able to completely obliterate this shadow demon out of existence and winds up even leaving a little bit of a crater afterwards to show you the raw power of this newfound sword. And that's not the only thing that we find out this sword has the capability to do.
Right.
In Emmett's case, he recognizes Roy and actually truly recognizes him because he says, "Roy, ? I remember."
Right.
In one of the bottom panels there before we get to the next page.
Which, in that particular spot, that just one phrase is really a pretty heavy and touching moment in the story.
Absolutely, because it lets you know right away that while he's wielding this sword, his Alzheimer's is cured.
Right.
He's in better health. He remembers pretty much everything and everybody that he's come into contact with, including Janie, his wife, and then realizes that he's a grandpa in his mind for the first time. I'm sure there was a moment where he knew it at one point, but obviously had since forgotten that as well, because he, of course, in the next panel says, "Did you just say grandpa?"
Right.
And so,
Janie being Roy's wife.
Correct.
He recognizes her.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. In his case, I guess for the first time again.
Right. Which, we never really get told he probably hasn't had Alzheimer's that incredibly long. He would have met her in previous and known who she was.
Right. I think it's implied that he pretty well knows who everyone is from the get-go from previous time. It's just he's since unfortunately forgotten them. And so with wielding this new mythical sword, he's able to retain all of the information that he's given and get all of those memories back, and really, for his age, is in tip-top condition while he's wielding the sword.
Right, and at that very point, as soon as the sword comes into play, that's when the art just becomes incredible and bright and vivid and just fantastical. I really enjoyed the art and the feel of it once that takes place.
And it really does ramp up to a whole other level because, like you said before that, it's kind of grimy, gritty, dark, and it has to be to set up the rest of the story to understand what this family has gone through and also to understand what they are about to embark on, which we get into in the second issue of this particular graphic novel.
Right.
And so we see this huge sword, and all the skies have cleared, the storm is gone, so it's starting to look like it's maybe on the up and up, but not exactly. Yes, all of his memories are coming back. Yes, he's got this new mythical sword that's pretty awesome, and the family seems to be coming together more than they have in a long time. He's even able to rebuild the farmhouse with the use of the sword.
Right.
So it's all kinds of untapped raw power.
Right.
For this sword.
And within those few pages, you just get a lot of happy, I remember everything, and basically reunions with him, between Emmett and his family members. It's almost like they haven't seen each other in a long time. It's just like a family reunion, even though they've been there then for a good long while he was sick.
Right, and I got a segue here. So the reunion gets broke up pretty quick
because it does, yeah.
Within the next couple of panels in the second issue of God Country, we have Aristus, who comes down essentially, as far as Emmett is concerned, from the heavens.
Right.
But we find out later he comes from an entirely different realm. And so he is the previous owner of Valifax, the name of the sword.
Right.
And we find that out in these panels. And it's you had mentioned this, Cap, before the podcast. And I thought it was a funny moment as well. So, of course, here's Emmett, who by all standards is your stereotypical country grandpa, wielding this legendary mythical sword that's much in the same line fine as Thor's hammer.
Yes,
let's
definitely.
be real. It's pretty much the same concept. I mean, you have to be worthy in order to actually wield this sword, and we find that out in one of the earlier panels of issue 2,
Right.
because of course Aristus is, in a very Shakespearean style, trying to talk down to Emmett and explain to him, mere mortal, you are not the wielder of this sword. It belongs to me. My father Adam created this sword. Valifax should not be in your hands. And Valifax, we find out, isn't just a mythical sword, but it's also its own entity,
Right.
in and of itself. And he very quickly corrects Aristus and says, you need to watch your mouth and watch how you speak to my wielder. I choose who is worthy, or who I deem to wield me.
Right. Yeah, it's a very cool moment, just because that's the first time you get a glimpse of what's to come, in that the sword is its own entity and it's self-aware and can talk, and it's just really cool when it even tells Aristus, a god, to kneel before Emmett and says, watch your mouth when you're talking about this one. Just, this is my wielder, I chose him, and you will respect that.
And to put this into perspective, I mean, this sword is known as the God of Blades, and so it's, I've dubbed it as the Dr. Manhattan
Right.
of swords, because at one point the sword has a monologue with Emmett later on and lets him know that it is the sword of swords. He is battling everywhere at every time. He's in a trembling soldier's hands at one moment. He is fighting off a siege of the underworld the next, all while still being wielded by Emmett. So it very much reminded me of Dr. Manhattan, in the sense that, time is relative. He is kind of everywhere,
Right.
all at once.
And it's also another really cool part is when, I believe it's Emmett, says, oh, so you're like Excalibur. And Valifax, the sword, responds, no, I'm not like Excalibur. I am Excalibur. I am every sword or weapon and blade that has ever been known or ever been talked about.
Yeah, and that was definitely a funny moment. I believe, just looking at the panels here, it was actually Aristus that was quick to correct him in regards to Valifax. And he says the same thing, though. Not really like Excalibur. He is
Right.
Excalibur, but yeah, he proceeds to tell him, like you had just said, he's every sword ever conceived, every myth, every song. It's just this omni weapon, essentially, that happens to be in a sword form.
Right.
More or less. And so, of course, all the while, to your point, Aristus is trying to explain to Emmett how important this sword is, and that, really, it doesn't belong. Yes, he's wielding it, but it doesn't technically belong to him, and he doesn't want the burdens that comes with wielding this sword, which, of course, Emmett is confused, because as far as he's concerned, it's burden-free, and it's solved all of his problems.
Right.
So he's not going to give it up in any form or fashion at this time.
Right, and it's also pretty cool because, right after the part where the sword tells Aristus to kneel and respect my wielder, then Emmett pretty much says to Aristus, hey, perhaps we should go and speak and just talk about things. And from there, it's funny because Aristus kind of becomes a friend at that point for the time being.
You can tell that Aristus' character is definitely well-intended. He's got a good heart and seems to be noble and wants to actually try and do this peacefully with them and not cause any ruckus or harm. Just, hey, if you can give me Valifax back, we'll be fine. Problem solved. I'll go back to my realm. You can enjoy yours. And we get a funny moment there where he says, what do you call this realm? It's quite beautiful. And of course, Emmett, being a Texan, simply says, Texas.
Yeah, and so from then on out, Aristus refers to it as the realm of Texas. But it's funny, and you come to find out, like you were saying, you really get the picture that Aristus is a good person, a noble person, and is just trying to help and tell Emmett that you don't want this burden of carrying the sword.
Aristus to me sort of, and I saw this in some of the articles that I had done for research for this podcast, he's very much like a Hercules type character.
Right. And come to find out, he's very conflicted in what he needs to do. and him and Emmett even have a conversation about that, in that, he can't return home without this sword because his father sent him here for this sword. So if you do not give me this sword, then the next time I come,
it won't be peacefully.
It won't be peacefully, and I won't come as an ally. And I thought that was a really cool moment. Just, it sucks because Aristus definitely kind of becomes fond of them and becomes friends with them, but he still has his place and his mission too,
Well, and, just like Roy is trying to take care of his father, Aristus has to, I don't want to say obey, but wants to appease his father as well. And that by doing so, it's with this sword. And so it's really kind of a hinge for both the Galactic side, that father-son combo of Aristus and Adam, and then also, of course, it's reconnected Roy and Emmett. So neither side really wants to, there's no give on either side. And so, of course, Aristus returns to the Kingdom of Always, which was created by Adam, that we find out later in the graphic novel. And it's essentially this shard of a realm that's left, but they're trying to hold on to it so desperately because it's their home, more or less.
Right. And another part that was interesting is, backing up a little bit before Aristus goes back to his realm, him and Emmett are talking, and like I said, he tells Emmett, that he can't return, and Emmett's like steadfast saying, I will not give up the sword, you go. And was it Aristus that asks him if he has something to say to his father? Yeah, and so Aristus says that, and we don't find out right away. He basically says, is there anything you would like me to say to my father? And then it goes to the next page, and Aristus is headed back to his realm.
He is, and so of course he meets with Adam, who's very displeased that he has not returned with Valfax as promised. And he asks, what are these words that this mortal wants me to hear?
Right.
And to be honest, given the language throughout the graphic novel, I was a little surprised that they didn't take an opportunity to kind of keep that going.
Right.
Because of course he says, yes, Father, or my Lord in this case, here's what the words were. And so we kind of get that baited next page, and that's where I thought surely he's going to go inappropriate, and we'll get a good laugh stick here. But all he ends up saying is, "Come and take it."
Right, and that ends that particular issue, and then the next issue starts, and it was just a really cool ending to that particular issue.
And it really sets the tone for the rest of the graphic novel from there, because then you realize, okay, well, if Adam is after this Valifax and Aristus is trying to obtain it, he can't be the only one.
Right.
So it's probably going to get worse before it gets better for the Quinlans. And more or less, that's exactly what transpires, because of course they start to get a little too comfortable there in the farmhouse, thinking, well, hey, things are back to normal. Kind of wild and crazy that all of a sudden, your dad's got this 12-foot mythical sword. But for now, we'll see where this goes.
Right, and he has it with him at all times because, he can't let go of it or he will forget again. And so it's a funny next couple of pages because it's this family, everything's better, and they're all living together and enjoying life. And Emmett he cleans up very well, he shaves, and then you see just this normal grandfather type figure. Meanwhile, he's holding his sword, and it's a very good moment, and everybody's happy, but it's not going to last.
No, not at all. And so, of course, with that being said, we get into where things start to get a little bit darker.
Right.
And it starts to turn to night, and of course when the sun goes down, things midnight will bump. And so that's when we see this undead, I guess you could say zombie type character come into the panel and bites Roy in the neck.
Right,
really.
Yeah. They're sitting out on their porch, basically, and they're talking, and Roy comes out to talk to his father, and then all of a sudden from behind Roy you see this undead figure reach up and bite him in the neck. And at that point I was like, oh no, I really feared that Roy was done at that moment, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. This is I felt like it was going to be like a big somber moment, basically. And thankfully it wasn't that somber as far as that's concerned, but the next thing is not good either.
Right, but Roy is able to fight off this undead being.
Which I'm not gonna lie, that kind of surprised me too, because he just like straight up turns around and decks this undead
Gives a
creature.
solid right hook there.
Right.
Yeah. And then, of course, Valifax jumps to action with Emmett and says, nothing will hide from me. Ends up brightening up and kind of like a giant light, if you will,
Right.
in the darkness. And, of course, once that happens...
Yeah, that was a crazy moment while I was reading it. All of a sudden, the sword lights up and Emmett holds it up to look. And, being out in the country, it's going to be pitch black, not going to be able to see anything. There's no street lights or anything like that. And so when he holds up the sword, all of a sudden, just surrounding the house, out in the fields, you see nothing but an army of undead, bad,
restless soldiers that are looking for blood or whatever they can get their undead hands on.
Right.
And then from there, of course, Valifax does what he does best and starts slashing and slicing through this army of undead. Of course, Emmett tells everybody, hey,
go inside.
Get into the house now, board it up as best you can, try and hold down the fort.
And whatever happens, stay inside.
Right, me and Valifax have got it from here.
And that was one aspect of the story that I really loved, was the fact that even though this is a normal, everyday country grandfather figure that, doesn't fully understand everything that's going on, this sword is communicating with him and just works with him, and they're able to fight off pretty much anything together. And it just, I never felt like they weren't going to make it. Like it was a really cool, oh, they're really awesome together.
Yeah, they become this unlikely dynamic duo, but I think that's the best part of this graphic novel, is just the juxtaposition may not be the right term, but the sense that you've got a country bumpkin grandpa with a certain set moral code and values, wielding a mythical, legendary sword, that the two just don't quite go together.
Right.
So kind of like country music and hip-hop, it's like you wouldn't mix those two, and in this particular example, you still wouldn't, but we'll pretend for a second that, say a country music star and a hip-hop artist got together and had a #1 record. Like, that's what this is,
right?
Essentially.
And like you said, that was part of the reason why you would think that, because this is a country grandpa type figure, you would think that you would be worried. This whole army is there, and what's he gonna do? But I never felt that, because I was like, he's got Valifax. This is not gonna go well for the other team.
And it doesn't at all, and that's why, of course, their leader, the ruler of the underworld, Baelgrim, so that we find out Adam also has another son,
right.
Much in the way of... So I kind of liken Adam in this case to sort of a Zeus-esque character.
Definitely.
And so I feel like Baelgrim in this sense is sort of like a kind of... he is, of course, a son of Adam, but in this case he reminded me of a Hades-type character.
Definitely.
To put that into perspective. And so, of course, Baelgrim arrives on the scene looking exactly how you would expect him, a very pale underworld figure.
Evil, undead-looking type figure.
Just afloat, ready to take what's his, this, of course, being, or what he thinks is his, this, of course, being Valifax.
Right.
And, of course, Valifax tries to warn him that, look, this isn't your normal enemy here. It's, yes, we've been chopping down the army of the undead for the last little bit, but you need to approach him a little bit differently. But he's not able to warn him quickly enough, and Emmett just assumes, okay, he's just like everybody else, let's take him out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, Baelgrim is not fazed by this, even calls him a fool, and is able to poof away, almost kind of like a Nightcrawler Bamf, but not quite.
Right. Almost like you would think something that Loki would do,
Very much so.
Cause, honestly, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, they've all got a core group of god figures.
With striking similarities.
Right. Which, you've got the main one being Adam / Zeus / Odin, and then Aristus / Thor / Hercules.
So forth, yep.
And then Baelgrim / Hades, and every other one, you would think of. So, it's all very familiar, but it's its own thing.
Absolutely. And so, of course, Baelgrim knows that Emmett is trying to essentially end him as quickly as possible, and so he's having none of that, and does one worse, and actually goes into the home and collects his granddaughter,
Right.
takes back off to where he came from. And so, of course, Valifax explains, he's like, well, I need to get her back. Where is she? Where is my granddaughter? Where's Dina? And Valifax explains, well, she's quite literally been taken to hell.
Right.
And so he not even figuratively has to go through hell to get her back. He literally
Goes to hell.
has to go there.
Yeah, and that moment was like there was no hesitation. Emmett was headed to hell, and that pretty much that ends that particular issue. And we head to the next issue where it's Emmett going through hell and basically, telling Valifax, this is it, this is hell. And Valifax tells him pretty much, well, this is a portion of hell. Every portion of hell is different for different people, basically.
Different strokes for different folks.
Right.
And all the meanwhile, of course, Janie and Roy are still back at the farmhouse, which is still very much surrounded by this undead army, which they're not doing as much damage since Baelgrim isn't necessarily wanting Valifax in this sense. Of course, they're just kind of still there hanging out.
Right. They're basically guarding the house to keep them where Baelgrim wants them.
And they, of course, being restless undead, start to get bored and I guess want to have a little bit of fun. And so they start to break into the house and realize, hey, there's still people in there. We can still feast.
Right.
There's nothing against that. We can still get what we want, and Baelgrim can have what he wants. And so, of course, Roy and Janie are having to get creative and try to fend them off. All the while, Emmett is in the process of trying to get Dina back from Baelgrim.
And that brings me to another just little spot. When they first get to hell, Emmett's asking Valifax, where's my daughter, or my granddaughter, how do I find her? And off in the distance you see a house just sitting by itself, and Valifax basically just says, well, if I had to bet, I would say she's in that house. And Emmett's like, why would you think that? And he says, well, that house wasn't there a little while ago. So it basically just appears in this area that they're in. And so they go to the house. And yes, that's where they were.
And of course, Baelgrim is with inside. He has Dina there resting. And so, of course, he starts to do much in the same way that Aristus did, talk down to Emmett, explaining to him that he's not worthy to wield Valifax. It really belongs to him, and that he's going to be the one at the end of the day to take it from Emmett.
Right.
But he also doesn't want to really bring any harm to the child.
Right, and it was kind of odd because, like, all of the gods except for Adam, he seems to be off his rocker and just wants everybody to die and get his sword back. But like Baelgrim even says, like you were saying, I don't have any need for this child. I don't want to hurt the child. I just need to get my father's sword back. Is basically all he's trying to do.
And of course, Emmett is like, look, I'm not going to give you the sword, and I'm also going to leave here with my granddaughter.
Right.
That's you want to talk about deals. This is the deal. And so, of course, Baelgrim tries to woo him and says, well, let me tempt you another way. If I can't simply get the sword from you in exchange for your granddaughter, what if I give you your granddaughter and a blast from your past?
Right.
And so, of course, he brings Elizabeth back, so it looks like. And, of course, Valifax is trying to tell him that don't fall for this, it's a trick.
Right. Do not look at it.
He's trying to trap you just so that he can steal me away.
Right. And Emmett even asks Valifax, is this real? Is that really her? And Valifax says, it doesn't matter. Don't proceed.
And do not pursue.
Right.
And so, of course, he ends up dropping Valifax, just as Baelgrim predicted. Baelgrim wields him and is rather confused because he doesn't feel this surge of power. He kind of questions, what's so special about you? Shouldn't I be feeling something? Shouldn't you bestow me with some level of might or ability? And so this is one of the cooler moments, I think, in the graphic novel, really, because you get a sense of the personality of this sword. And Valifax kind of jabs back, or I guess you could say stabs back, in this case, at Baelgrim, letting him know just how unworthy he is, even as a god.
Right. Yeah, it's a very cool moment, just because, especially when Emmett drops Valifax. Valifax is, saying, no, do not drop me, you know what I mean? He doesn't say it like that, but that's the gist of it. And so you think, oh no, this is this is the end. This is not going to work out like we thought it was. And then once Belgrim picks up Valifax, Valifax is an awesome god, basically, because, he seems more powerful than any of the others. And so while Belgrim is holding Valifax, you all of a sudden see Belgrim start to just crumble and wither away. And so Valifax pretty much just does away with Belgrim, like it's nothing.
And in turn, he also releases all of the undead army members and the restless,
right,
and lets them rest, which is a super cool moment because, like you said, to your point, you get the full sense of just how powerful this god of blades really is.
Mm-hmm. And so while he's withering away, the sword is doing a monologue, basically saying, that all of these soldiers and undead army that you have do not deserve this. We're going to let them rest, and he sets them free. And so back at the farmhouse where Dina and Janie are, you see all of the undead army just kind of disappear and go away. And so then, we jump back to Valifax and Emmett and Belgrim's gone. And so Emmett picks up Valifax, and you even get a moment which was kind of cool to me, that where Valifax basically apologizes to Emmett and says, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea what you've lost and what you've been through."
Right, and even before that, you get a really intense panel-to-panel scene. Of course, as everyone is fading away, because Valifax says let them rest, that includes his Elizabeth.
Right.
And so, of course, Emmett is red hot at the sham that's left of Belgrim, and so uses him as his own personal punching bag.
Right.
And decimates him to nothing more than a pile of bone and blood.
Right.
And then, of course, like you said, Valifax really understands kind of where Emmett and the Quinlans as a whole are coming from and
right,
from what they've been through. So they connect a little bit more and just become a really, like I said, just an unlikely but dynamic duo.
Right.
Between themselves.
Right. And so after all that takes place, then the next thing you see is Emmett returning with Valifax as well as his granddaughter. And, they run up to Janie and Roy, and it's another quick family reunion. And I don't know about you, but when I read this section of it, it almost felt like it was the ending of the book to me. It felt like it was kind of coming to an end, and then I realized that there was still a lot of book left. And I was like, oh, well, that means only one thing, that he's going to go after the big guy himself next.
Oh, yeah.
And finish this.
Most likely, because, yeah, for sure, we have from here 2 more issues, so
right,
there's definitely plenty of novel left, and you're exactly right. So in issue 5, that's where Adam realizes, okay, Belgrim's out of the picture, he failed me.
Right.
Time to send Aristus. Hey, you are the war god, so let's send you down full armor, and same mission applies.
Right.
And excessive force if necessary. I want my sword back, because we've learned in issue 5 that Adam was actually the one that forged Valifax from a dying realm. So to give you an example of just kind of how power hungry and wild this Adam character is, he crafted and forged Valifax from a dying realm.
Right, which you come to find out is just billions and billions of people, or aliens, or whatever you want to call them, that he annihilated in order to make this sword. And there's even one point where, I don't know if it was Aristus telling Emmett this, but it comes up basically, don't blame the sword, he had nothing to do with it. It's not his fault that he was forged and created at the demise of these millions or billions of people, and so it's a really interesting segment of the story. And then the next thing we see is Aristus coming back to get his sword, and just like he said, the next time I come back, I'm afraid I won't be an ally.
This won't be a friendly visit.
Right.
And so, of course, he's got his warhammer, his armor, and Emmett, meanwhile, is like, alright, let's go. Let's do this. I've got Valifax. What else do I need?
Yeah, he never backs down one time.
Not at all. Doesn't quiver or falter in the slightest. Quite the opposite, really. He gives him everything that he can handle. And,
right,
of course, the narrator throughout is giving us bits and pieces of what goes on and what ensues. And in this particular moment, he says that essentially the entire state of Texas could hear this battle.
Right.
And it's pretty epic, because you get a showdown in the desert, or a duel in the desert, if you will.
Right, and during it all, meanwhile, you still can see the, I guess, confliction, that's not a word. You can still see that Aristus is conflicted on what to do, that he does not want to destroy these people, and that he does not want to end this the way that his father wants him to end this.
Not at all, but of course Emmett is completely content with doing whatever he has to do to protect his family, and if that means
to protect his reality and his memories.
Right, and if that means taking out Aristus, that's what he's going to do. And so they battle back and forth from panel to panel, all kinds of great imagery and action throughout. And one of the coolest scenes is towards the middle end of issue 5. And that's when you see, after all of this back and forth between Emmett and Aristus, somehow Emmett winds up with both his Warhammer and Valifax.
Right.
And so he's essentially won the battle. And of course, Aristus is trying to remind him, like, this isn't you. You don't have to do this. Just, I'm just trying to literally deliver this sword back to my father.
Right.
Like, please. And of course, we did a really cool callback here in the middle of issue 5 where Emmett says the same sort of line that he said in the beginning of, I'll kill you, I'll take you out.
Right.
And of course, Dina, his granddaughter, says, Grandpa, hey, calm down. It's not worth it. Which is more or less, she didn't say anything in the beginning of the graphic novel, but simply that little callback of, oh wow, it's his realization, I feel like, in my opinion, of, okay, well, I'm back in the same boat.
Right.
I'm detrimental to my family with Alzheimer's and without the sword, or I put them in danger with all of this crazy demon underworld nonsense when I have the sword. So, Is there really a difference?
Yeah, and it's really a great moment because you can tell that the power is taking over Emmett and he's just not stopping, and everybody is telling him to stop. Calm down, don't do this. Even Aristus is saying it, and Roy is saying it, and Janie's saying it. But the minute that his granddaughter says it, that's when he stops. And I thought that was a really cool moment, and like you said, call back to the beginning of the book.
Right. It's moreover, I think, too, kind of that display of that childhood innocence of hey, everything's cool, everything's fine. It'll all be all right, Grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And so he realizes there's really, at this point, only one way to truly end this.
Right.
And so he knows, you see this realization develop from panel to panel on his character's face of, okay, I know what I have to do next, and I know where I have to go next.
Right.
Because, of course, Aristus has explained to him exactly who Adam is, where he is, and so he pretty much...
Yeah, he even asks Valifax, basically, can we do this? And he doesn't ever even say what it is, but you get the picture, and Valifax says, it's going to be difficult, but yes, we can do this. And his family, meanwhile, is like, do what? What are you doing? And so Emmett's talking to Valifax and basically says, okay, let's go. And his family is like, what? Where are you going? Don't leave. And so that's the end of that particular issue. But what's really funny to me is as soon as he leaves with Valifax, Aristus is still at the house with Roy and Janie, and they're just sitting there talking, and Aristus is talking to the granddaughter, and it's just like they know that he did not want to do what his father wanted him to do. And so, again, Aristus is an ally with them.
And not only that, but per his father, he's not even allowed to return to the realm until he has Valifax, because Adam, that's how powerful. To give you an idea of just how omnipotent this Adam character is, he puts more or less a hold or a bind on the realm that his son is from, saying that you cannot break this or cross back into our plane unless you have Valifax in hand, almost like don't bother coming back home.
Right, which is crazy, and it's sad just because Aristus doesn't want to do this, but it's his family and he's conflicted.
And speaking of conflict, that's exactly what we get. This whole storyline comes to a head, rightfully so, in the final issue of God Country, and that is the back and forth battle for Valifax between Adam and Emmett.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, like we said earlier, Emmett has spoken with Valifax and decides he knows what he needs to do, and they head off to the Kingdom of Always.
Of course, Emmett arrives there, and his mission is very simple. Confront Adam and end this thing once and for all, like we had mentioned earlier.
Right.
And so, of course, he does just that, and they have a epic showdown of wit and strength. Of course, obviously keep in mind, the only thing that has Emmett on a level playing field is Valifax, because we find out quite quickly just how omnipotent this Adam is. And he, much in the same way that Beldrum and much in the same way that Aristus tried to explain, is, hey, this isn't yours. It's, in this instance, it's literally Adam's.
That's true.
Of anyone, he has the right, being the creator of Valifax, to say, yo, dude, that's my sword.
Right.
I'd like you to give it back. Only he says it in not the nicest of ways.
Right.
And of course continues to belittle Emmett much in the way that everybody else has. And so at this point, of course, Emmett's not having any of that. And it's just, this is beyond the sword now. This is between you and me, mano a mano, let's go. Whoever makes this out of this alive gets Valifax. How about that?
Right.
And so they exchange blows. And of course, Emmett still holds his own, wielding Valifax. It's a back and forth battle. All the while, what of course Adam fails to realize in his power-hungry pursuit of this sword, because ultimately we find out in the graphic novel that is his legacy, and he very much wants that to stay intact, and wants to keep the shard of the realm that he has left, and he'll do anything to protect it. But what he doesn't realize is that in his anger of trying to get back Valifax, he is actually in turn destroying what is left of that shard of their realm, in this case the Kingdom of Always.
Right.
And meanwhile, Aristus is realizing and sensing, oh, this seal that he's placed on it is starting to fade or break. I can actually return home.
Right.
To which Roy responds, well, that's a good thing, right? And Aristus somberly realizes and tells Roy, no, if that's what I think it means, then you should come with me as well, because something's happening and that something isn't good.
Right. And he, Roy thinks about it, and then he's like, I can't leave my family. I'm not going to do this again. We're not getting split up. I'm going to stay here. And then, I appreciated the fact that Janie, his wife, comes and says, no, you need to go. It's okay. We'll be okay. We'll be here when you get back. And so Roy and Aristus take off and head to the Kingdom of Always.
And when they get there, of course, it's mostly destroyed, and we get this really cool final moment between, it's also sad, between Emmett and Adam, so this omnipotent God and this man of God, if you will.
Right.
Hence the title of the graphic novel, God Country. And they're trying to it's each one's final blow. And so, of course, Adam sends these spindly, kind of like vines, but hardened.
Right.
Almost like rock vines. And they come down and right through the back of Emmett. And so you see right away, it's like, okay, that punctured all the way through. He's probably not going to make it back from that. And so by that point, Adam says, enough, give me my sword. And of course, Emmett does just that.
Right.
And lets it fly right towards his neck, although he's not 100% sure whether this last move is going to work, because it's mentioned earlier by Valifax, the sword itself, that yes, he acknowledges that Adam was his creator, and it's questionable as to whether or not the sword would turn on the master.
Right.
And so for a fleeting moment, Emmett realizes, well, what if in mid-flight Adam is able to switch its direction, catch it, and utilize it or get what he wants at the end of the day. But of course that doesn't happen. Valifax, being its own entity, has its own idea and makes its mark, cuts seemingly pretty close to the neck area of Adam, and then returns to him, and he's actually surprised. He says, he says, you came back.
Right, I didn't think about that until you just said that, but obviously that does happen because as you'll see in a few minutes, that comes into play.
For sure, and it's a very touching moment afterwards, because of course we realize that they both have given their final blows in the battle. The dust is pretty much settling,
right,
as everything is crumbling, and so of course Roy, convinced by Aristus to go and see this out, they arrive on the scene of what was this ultimate battle between the two, Emmett and Adam. And so it's this touching father moment scene between Roy and Emmett on one hand, and on the other, it's not quite what we expected, I think, reading it the first time through.
Right.
But when you think about how power crazy and hungry Adam is, it's not as surprising.
Right.
So, of course, Aristus tries to approach Adam and say, Father, please, almost as if to say, stop this madness, you're destroying what's left of our home. But he doesn't even get that far. He almost doesn't even get Father, please. And of course, Adam is having none of this. He's done. He says enough, and essentially ends Aristus there on the spot. And so that's a sad scene for sure in that instance. Meanwhile, we get a very touching moment between, at least I think it's touching to me, Cap. I think you would agree.
Oh, absolutely.
Between Emmett and Roy, where he's still holding Valifax. There's that kind of final moment between the two.
Right. Yeah. So after Emmett throws Valifax at Adam and it takes its blow, it, like you said, it turns around and returns to Emmett, and Emmett's laying there essentially dying, and that's when Roy and Aristus first get there. And after everything happens with Aristus and Adam, it flips over to Roy and his father Emmett, and he's sitting there holding his dad, telling him he doesn't want him to go. He's upset, he's distraught, and then I don't know what exactly makes him grab the sword. I don't know if like Emmett says grab the sword. I don't think he does. I think that just instinctively, almost even maybe Roy is thinking, I'm gonna avenge my father and take the sword and finish Adam off. But when he grabs the sword, the next couple of pages of the graphic novel is just a montage of bright pictures of when Emmett and Roy were younger, when Roy was a little kid. It just shows it's basically showing you all of Emmett's past and his memories with Roy, and just, it's a very touching, oh, my dad really loved me moment, it's just every memory that you could think of the two of them together. And that was an awesome, awesome moment in the book.
I think for me, it was arguably one of my favorite panel-to-panel pieces throughout this graphic novel, because it just really drove home the overarching concept of the importance of family. And from there, really, the novel comes to a close. Roy returns. Of course, the Kingdom of Always, the realm itself collapses, so there is no more.
Right.
We see that in the panel-by-panel process. And from there, the narrator lets us know that everything went back to normal. It was almost as if it never quite happened at all.
Yep.
And the sword disappears, and the Quinlans continue on, and this particular story from Dina gets passed down from what she was told by Roy, and so on and so forth, and that's why we're being told it now by this narrator. And then really the novel comes to a close, and we get a really cool extra pages from, it's actually called Extras,
right.
And we see variant covers for each issue of God Country that gets wrapped together in this beautiful graphic novel, and the variant covers are just so wicked and cool. And we get a nice tagline on the back of the book that we forgot to mention at the top of the podcast here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's salvation is a double-edged sword. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a very awesome statement, and I honestly didn't notice it until, we were doing the podcast and looking over the book and everything. But, obviously, it's a book that we would highly recommend, or at least I would. I'm assuming you would as well.
For sure. It's one that I would recommend to our listeners or readers in general that enjoy the graphic novel medium. It's different. I think up here at the top left it classifies this as an epic Texan battle fantasy, which is perfect. It's going to be the smallest sliver there in the library, unless maybe you're in Texas.
Right.
But it's just something that's different. It's refreshing. I think most of the reviews on the back of the book speak to that, and it's arguably one of my favorite parts so far in reading Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw's work. Of course, such titles as Thanos Wins, Cosmic Ghost Rider, those two go hand in hand. I highly recommend that run. It's all kinds of cosmic fun, and it's Marvel, so it's hard to go wrong there.
Absolutely.
Of course, we ourselves tend to be more DC guys, especially in the graphic novel medium.
Right.
But you just really can't go wrong right now, in my opinion, with Cates or Shaw get together, because the storytelling is going to be superb and the artwork is going to be beautiful, and it's just always something unique and a little bit different than your run-of-the-mill or typical graphic novel run. And so with that, Cap, we've got to do a True Nerdy by Nature ranking for this graphic novel before we get out of here. So for me, we talked about this earlier.
Right.
So 5 out of 5 is something that is game-changing, just really set the precedent for that particular medium or character. Because this is kind of a random one-off storyline, I don't think we can really truly give it a 5 out of 5. So for me, it's still really good for what it is.
Oh, yeah.
I have to give it a 4 out of 5, I think, solidly, because it stands out, but, there's not really much in the way of changing any kind of game. It's its own story.
Right, and I agree with that. And I will also give it a 4 out of 5. I almost wanted to give it a 5 out of 5 at first, just because it is such an awesome story and just a very emotional and heartwarming story. And I agree with you that 5 out of 5 really needs to be designated to stories that just completely change and exceed your expectations of what the story could be. And I would reserve that kind of thing for like a Jeff Johns Green Lantern run, like we had mentioned when we were talking before the podcast, just because that run was just such an expanding of the Green Lantern mythos. And so, like you said, I would agree with that ranking and give this also a 4 out of 5.
And so that's going to wrap up this episode of Nerdy by Nature. As always, we thank you for listening. And so in our next episode, we'll take a little bit of a hiatus. So this one will be released after Christmas due to the holiday scheduling and season. And we're super excited for our next episode because it's going to be over the Rise of Skywalker. So we're going to do a movie recap. This is the end of a saga for us Star Wars fans. And if you didn't catch our Star Wars episode, we recapped the original trilogy that came out back in the 70s and 80s, and we also went over, of course, episodes 1 through 3, talked a little bit about Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and then went into some of the newer movies as well that have been released. So it's sort of an all-encompassing Star Wars recap, so feel free to go back and listen to that. In preparation for Rise of Skywalker, I know we'll be watching some Star Wars films over the Christmas break.
Absolutely.
And getting prepared for Rise of Skywalker, which hits theaters on December 20th, so make sure you get your tickets. They're selling like hotcakes from what I understand, and rightfully so. This is a pretty big deal for us nerds. And speaking of you nerds out there and big deals, we have a Facebook page, and so we wanted to make sure to mention that this episode because we've forgotten to do so on previous episodes.
Right.
So feel free to go to that search bar, type in Nerdy by Nature, same name, no surprise, no spoiler alert there, and feel free to request to join as a member. We'll be happy to add you, and this is a great place to go because you can see all of our communication, make posts, make comments. We constantly do our best to keep that updated and you, the listener, involved. So feel free to let everybody know. It's an easier way to share Nerdy by Nature and our podcast. So Cap will be uploading the content and we'll be sharing it to as many people as possible. And of course, as always, feel free to like, hit the subscribe button, comment, absolutely let us know what we've gotten right, what we've gotten wrong, what we can improve, what you would like to hear. And then absolutely share this with everybody that you think would be interested in this realm. This realm, of course, being Earth.
Right.
Little God Country joke there for you. And so with that, as always, signing off, I'm Agent Smith.
And I'm Captain Rogers. Have a Merry Christmas and God bless.